All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. And I know there's a lot of parents out there, you're having trouble with your kids. You're trying everything, giving, a good cop, bad cop. Nothing is working. One of your buddies says, "Hey, there's a place out in Utah wilderness. They'll straighten your kid up, or maybe you're thinking of boarding school, and you're just, you're trying to do what's best, and then you find out later that, boy, these places, not all of them are so squeaky clean. And reports are coming out now. It's the latest thing. We had Boy Scouts, we had the church with sex abuse. I mean, it's really all these institutions that you kind of just accepted were, you know, places, of refuge, good places where you could put your kids and not worry about it. But that is obviously not the case. And I brought Caleb Cunningham on to discuss this topic in more detail. How are you doing, Caleb?
Doing very well. I appreciate you having me and being able to talk about this important issue. As you said, this has been going on for a long time. I mean, what we call the exploited teen industry has been going on for about 100 years, and they prey on parents being at the end of their rope, and they sell them snake oil, essentially. They use words like therapeutic, even though there's no doctors there. They call themselves wilderness camps, wilderness retreats, reformatory schools. And the harm that they've done to thousands upon thousands of children around this country should be criminal. It's really disgusting, and you've got to be careful as a parent because these places have deceptive marketing practices, and we've got lawsuits on that around the country for what they've done to children. The sexual abuse. Famously, Paris Hilton went to one of these facilities, and they performed gynecological exams by male staff members in the middle of the night. She was molested multiple times at her tenure at a facility that costs $12,000 a month. So it's not even a price point thing. These schools, these places are at the junction of vulnerable children, no regulation, and money. And we see abuses, as you said, Boy Scouts of America, the Catholic Church. You're seeing the same thing with these exploited teen facilities around the country. Utah famously has a bunch of them. Even here in Florida, we had the Dozier School for Boys was in operation since the early 1900s. There's 80-something kids in an unmarked grave out there that were tortured and killed right here in Florida, right here in Marianna, Florida. And that wasn't shut down until the early 2000s.
Yeah. All right. Well, we're going to go into this a little bit more, exactly what you guys are doing. And, if there are parents out there or relatives, oftentimes you have the troubled teen, you've stopped believing everything they're saying, and then you're hearing them report back to you all these horrific stories. You might be like, "Oh, I don't believe my child, my child just can't tell the truth." Well, I got to tell you, you might want to pay attention. But let me just go back a little bit and introduce Caleb. Caleb is an attorney at Levin Papin Rafferty, one of the best law firms ever in the world. They have taken on more major campaigns to correct pollution, abuse than any other law firm that I know of. And I know Caleb was a prosecutor for many years, has come aboard and is going to take his skills as a prosecutor to help get justice. Okay, so now we're calling this the troubled teen industry. Is that the nomenclature for what this whole horrific genre is?
So they like to call themselves the exploited teen, or the troubled teen industry. We call them the exploited teen industry. I think that's more accurate term. So it's about $23 billion a year in public funds goes to this industry because a lot of states have stopped providing these services themselves, and they've started hiring these for-profit companies like Sequel, Vivint, United Health, the Devereaux Foundation. And a lot of these places are backed by private equity with Wall Street. So they have an incentive to cut costs, cut corners. Here in Florida, we spend about $40 million in just the state of Florida paying for these facilities that we put kids in. And there's been riots, there's been sexual abuse, there's been beatings. Famously, just a couple years ago, you had a kid up in Michigan at one of these facilities where the staff crushed him to death for throwing a sandwich. They laid on top of him until he stopped breathing. He would go on to die at the hospital. Here in Florida, we had a young girl, I think she was 17. Her parents were having problems with her. They put her in a Christian reformatory camp, and they gave her Pepto-Bismol 20 times in a very short period of time until she became unresponsive. They were force feeding her soup. She ended up dying en route to the hospital after they finally called for outside medical attention. You're a parent, you're having problems with your teenager, and you think this place is going to fix it. They've got a nice website. They promise you horseback riding and all this stuff. Well, none of that really happens. I encourage viewers, if you're thinking about one of these facilities, go to Unsilenced, again, unsilenced.org. They're a nonprofit. They're a survivor-led nonprofit. So everybody that's in the administration of that charity has been through one of these facilities around the country, and you'll see maps there. I mean, it's just like a pox across the country, and they vet these places because there are some places, that are genuinely therapeutic, but a lot of these places, profit-driven, and the abuses that we're seeing, both sexual and physical abuses, are horrifying. And that's before we even get into the educational neglect. We've got stories out of Alabama in particular where you've got kids ranging in age from like 8 to 16 being thrown in a room with a coloring book, and that's their education time. So they're so far behind, they don't get their GED, they don't get the education that they need. So now you've got some sort of trauma that sent them there, and then they're being re-traumatized at this facility, and they're missing out on an education. So parents are being duped by these people and by this marketing campaigns is really disgusting and tragic. And that's why we waded into this space. And as you so generously said, we've been involved with everything from asbestos, tobacco litigation, the PFAS, the chemicals in the water. We're in a lot of stuff, but this is something that's near and dear to our heart, and we've poured a lot of resources in trying to educate, hopefully your viewers today, but attorneys as well, as they look at cases and to understand how to proceed with these cases.
All right. So I actually never really realized this was going on until Mass Torts Made Perfect conference a couple of weeks ago in Vegas, and I saw this on the agenda, and I said, "Wow, that looks kind of interesting." And I went. And so what I want to do is kind of break it down. I mean, there's a lot, you're talking about no regulation, government funding, parents sending their kids, but there's really two. The way I saw it, the way I understood it, there's two groups. There's the voluntary, the parents that have kids, they don't know what to do with them, and they say, we voluntarily are sending our child to the wilderness in Utah or boarding school or what have you. And then you have the involuntary, which are, I'm assuming, like the state, the juvenile justice system, and they're like the kid that does, let's send him out to one of these other facilities. Is that the breakdown?
Exactly. You're exactly right. So you've got two tracks. So if you're a viewer right now and you've got a kid that's giving you problems, so you're one group, and so a parent, a guardian says, little Timmy smoked weed in his room, or little Timmy's giving me problems. He's not listening to his mommy, daddy, whatever. So we're going to put him in one of these reformatory schools or wilderness camp. They're going to toughen him up, that sort of thing. And so those are one way kids get into these facilities. Another way is a juvenile judge in a youthful detention, or like a Department of Family Services, a kid who doesn't have parents, things like that, may send these kids there too. So those are kind of the two tracks that we see kids following. That's why there's so much government money involved, is that the juvenile system and the family service system is sending kids there. But a lot of times they're the same facility. They may market it themselves a little differently. Again, famously, Paris Hilton family had problems with her, and so they sent her to a facility. Again, this was a very expensive facility. It advertised itself to the elite, horseback riding and canoeing and all this sort of stuff. And we're gonna be strict with them. But in reality, their employment practices were, to put a mirror under somebody's nose, and if it fogs up, they'll hire you. And so these people weren't background screened. They're hiring, people who we wouldn't trust to make a hamburger to watch these kids. And there's no government agency overseeing this. There's no inspections. And then if the kids write home, one of the things we had out in Vegas is we had survivors come talk to us. And they said, if we mentioned how bad it was in our letters, we got punished. We'd have to they'd put us in little boxes. They'd put us out in hot boxes out in the desert and things to incentivize the kids not to tell anybody what was happening. And, a lot of these children have histories. of lying or something like that. So nobody believes them. And I think that's why they got away with it so long, quite frankly, is that, oh, these kids are troubled. We can't believe them. This can't be real. I can tell you, we've got some council in Alabama that we're working with. You know, these facilities have feces on the wall. They've got blood on the wall. The kids are being eaten up with bed bugs. They're being beat by staff. They're being beat by other kids. Again, one of the cases that we're working on, the staff would pay other kids. Like if this kid was giving them a problem, they would bribe other kids with candy to beat that kid up. Kid ended up having a fractured skull.
Wow, that just sounds just horrifying. And, you know, you mentioned reformatory schools. We talked about the wilderness, boarding schools. What other facilities? Because it's not just one type of facility. It's several.
Yeah, I mean, they call themselves all sorts of things because, again, there's no regulation. So they call themselves therapeutic boarding schools. They call themselves reformatory schools, wilderness camps, survival camps, teen challenge this, teen challenge that, conversion camps. Famously, fairly recently, there was the name of it was Agape Ranch in Missouri. That owner and operator just got charged with, I think, 27, 28 felony counts because he was having sex with all the children. It's really despicable because there hasn't been oversight. There hasn't been regulation. And this has been the Wild West of money and kids. And we see time and time again throughout our history is when you have kids and you have money and you don't have government oversight of any kind, this attracts these predators. And you've got Wall Street coming in saying, we want you to be profitable. We want you to be profitable. Famously, Sequel, Vivint, Brighter Path, whatever they're calling themselves today, you know, they bragged they're worth $500 million. They were in 19 states across the country. And, you know, they're cutting staff. You've got riots. You've got staff members having sex with kids. You've got staff members having beating kids. It's unbelievable. You wouldn't believe this is happening if you don't do a little research and look into it. And then you see it's so well documented all across the country. Even if your state doesn't have a lot of these facilities, a lot of states were sending kids. So, you know, California, Washington State, a lot of the Western states didn't have them in their state, but they were sending those kids to facilities in Utah, facilities in Alabama, facilities in Florida, or wherever.
All right. So when you talk about one of the problem being lack of regulation, are you talking like these places are not even licensed as, you know, falling under some chapter that's governed by, you know, like the scholastic whatever, or is this just inadequate regulations?
It's both. It's both. I mean, some states have absolutely no regulation. And what happens, especially with those kids I was talking about earlier, where you're coming from another state, well, the state that sent you says that you're the problem of the state you went to. And the state you went to says, oh, well, they're not our problem. They're the state that sent them's problem. And so, no, you just fell through the cracks. And so you have a child who was sent by a state actor who's completely lost, that nobody's following up on, nobody's regulating, and these facilities were taking advantage of it. And, you know, one of the funny things, some of these facilities kind of got together and formed their own little organization, and they say, oh, we're certified by so-and-so. Well, that's just their trade organization. That'd be like me and you getting together and we'll make up an LLC and say we're certified by that LLC. Well, it sounds really good on a website and you can trick people with it, but it doesn't mean anything. You made up the criteria because there's no national criteria.
Yeah. All right. Now you're giving us a lot of information. Including the fact, and that's why I keep having to bring it back and, you know, break this down because it's largely unbelievable. So $23 billion a year, is that what you said?
That's right. Public funds.
Public funds. So this is money that normally goes to the state, and the state has juvenile detention. Like they have facilities themselves, and they said, you know what, it's over our head. We're just gonna let this private corporation take this trouble off our hands. You know.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, and what a lot of these places did is, so again, this particular company I'm focusing in on, obviously I'm eyeball deep in it, so I apologize. You have to keep unpacking stuff. I get really animated about it, as you can tell.
I love it.
But they, you know, so they bill Medicare, Medicaid, you know, $200, $300, $400 a day to house each one of these children.
Yeah.
So they're incentivized. Let's squish as many in as we can into a facility so we can bill the federal government. And
Yeah.
so what you're seeing is they're billing the feds, and then they're also billing the state to house these children. And so it's a money-making scheme for them, and the state doesn't have to have a facility. They don't have to man it. They just, like you said, they just hand it off and say, here, private business. So the company I was talking about, their original name was Sequel. And the reason it was named Sequel is, obviously Sequel is number two. Their first business was private prisons, for-profit prisons. So then they said, let's do the same thing for kids. And they literally named their company Sequel because they were bringing the private prison model for children.
Yeah.
So that's where a lot of this is coming from. And it makes my skin crawl thinking about it.
All right. So listen, like myself, I'm assuming, a year ago or so, you never even knew about this, right?
Right.
And so how did you and Levin Papantonio Rafferty, had your eyes opened about this? What is the law firm doing about it?
So obviously, Mike Papantonio is one of our big partners here. He's a great guy. Him and Troy Rafferty reached out to by survivors of the Dozier School. And so the Dozier School is an early one of these facilities. It was ran by the state of Florida for many years. And those survivors had engaged in litigation some years ago. It did not, the attorneys messed some stuff up. And I don't think people understood what was happening. Certainly the state did not acknowledge everything that they needed to acknowledge. Later on, they issued an apology, and Troy and Mike got involved, and the state is doing more. They're working on legislation for these survivors. These kids were beat, these kids were murdered, these kids were sexually assaulted. And the state has acknowledged that this happened to them and said, well, sorry, and that's all that and it's affected. It's heartbreaking when you're talking to a 60-year-old man who went through this, and it has affected every day of his life.
Yeah.
So that got us involved. And when I came on, having been in the prosecutor world for many years, I'm used to seeking out bad guys and holding them accountable. They asked me to look at it, and working with Mike and those guys, we saw this huge industry out here. This industry, and you see these one-off, you think it's a one-off, right? Oh, this is just a one bad actor in Michigan, or this is just a one-time incident in Florida. But when you start peeling back the onion, the whole thing is rotten. The whole thing is rotten, and you talk to these survivors, and it's just absolutely heartbreaking. So it's been kind of something that has snowballed. We partnered with Unsilenced and talked to those guys. They came out to our conference, spoke to us, and listen. You cannot listen to those survivors and not want to go do something. Go make changes in your legislature. Go certainly make sure no one of your loved ones or friends get tricked into this thing. And sue these people, because you have doctors who are involved in some of this. You have Wall Street money again is involved in this. You have legislatures that are involved in this. It's really an evil industry, and we're doing everything we can, both from a legislative side, from a judiciary side, to hold these people accountable.
Okay, Unsilenced, nonprofit group. What's their gig in this whole?
Yeah, so Unsilenced, they've done great work. So they're a nonprofit based out of California. They're all survivors of the industry. So every one of the people in that group, if you go to their website, you'll hear their story. One of the things they did that's been super helpful for us is they've collected kind of a database, and you and all your viewers can go on their website, see the map, see the facilities, see the press releases from around the country, and you'll see the same information. And they have a tally of the dead, the known dead from these facilities around the country. There's about 150 names or so on there of kids who died from hypothermia, kids who died from puncture wounds and things like that, beat to death. Yeah. It really, from sickness, from medical neglect, all across the country here in the United States. And these aren't, 100-year-old cases. In 2008, the Government Accountability Office issued a report on some of these facilities around the country of kids who had died, suggesting regulation. But because of the lobbying efforts of the industry, that was never adopted. So there is no national regulation on these guys. It's just up to the individual states. Unsilenced has been a real big voice on the state level and on the national level with Paris Hilton on speaking out against this and trying to get legislation. But I think a large part is we need attorneys and we need families to know about this and to have a plan of action moving forward. And then we've kind of stepped in here at 11 Papantonio and Rafferty, educating attorneys and trying to educate the public with folks like Unsilenced.
All right. So when you're talking about attorneys and educating them, like what's the gist of that? Are you trying to get these lawyers to understand that there's a problem? Maybe they represent people whose kids are there, and they might have an inkling that they knew the background of the child, and they might know that the child is not doing well at the facility. So like,
right.
What's the essence of the education for the lawyer?
So for the lawyer, the essence is this is not just a personal injury case. This isn't just a broken arm. This isn't just a sexual abuse case, right? So usually when we look at a case like that, we say, well, this is a one-off, and we focus in laser focused on our one. You need to look at the whole industry. You need to look at it in context. You need to talk to people like Unsilenced or us who have these databases, because you're going to get more damages. You're going to get more money for your client when you look at it in total, and you can make an impact with your case, because your case isn't the only one. First of all, you need to believe the kid, because it may sound outlandish if you don't know any better, right? If some kid told me, a year ago, oh, I was in this facility and there's blood on the wall and there's feces on the wall, I'd say, I don't know that I believe that. But when you see like the disability advocacy group going in and literally taking pictures of it, it's like, oh, well, it's true. It is real. And I think we as attorneys sometimes miss that, right? If we don't understand the whole context of what this case is in, you're leaving a lot of money on the table. You're leaving a lot behind that you could help these other kids and your own client. So I think that's the biggest thing with educating attorneys is, hey, this isn't just oh, well, he got his broken arm and it's a basic liability issue that they're going to pay, medicals. No, it's a lot bigger than that. You need to look at it in context. And quite frankly, there's other kids in those facilities in your backyard that you need to get representation, because I'm always amazed at how many kids and their families don't even know they have a case. They think that they consented, or they think that, because the state put them there, that they don't have a case. And that's simply not true.
All right. Now, sexual abuse, rape, horrific experience. A lot of people just like, the police don't believe them. Nobody believes them. They just, silence themselves. 30 years later, they don't realize the trauma that they've gone through because of this. And then it's, people think, all right, it's too late to file a lawsuit. But what we've seen with a lot of states and the sexual abuse and the Boy Scouts and all that is that they open up a new statute of limitations.
Right.
If you give another year or another 2 years, when you talk about the legislative efforts that Levin, Papantonio, Rafferty are trying to do, is that one of them? I mean, like, what are the people that this happened to 30 years ago? Are they just no chance whatsoever? Or
well, you're exactly right. So some states have what's called minority tolling, right? And so if you're a kid when this happens, you get extra time. Some states like Maryland recently, there's no statute of limitations on sexual abuse anymore. So you can reach back in certain situations forever if you fit. So if this has happened to you, first of all, I can't tell you how sorry I am, and I believe you. Secondly, you need to talk to an attorney who specializes in this in your state or your area, because it varies, as you know, wildly from state to state to state, depending on where you are. An attorney needs to look at this. I mean, a layperson cannot determine for themselves whether or not there's any recovery to be had, right?
Yeah.
So that's the biggest thing. Even if it has been 10 years, depending on how the years fall and whether or not you were a minor and all sorts of stuff, you may still have a case, even though it's been 10, 20, 30 years ago, if it's a sexual abuse case. I think for a lot of folks, especially who are adults now, they know that this affects their life every day. They know that they have problems with certain things, but they're scared to talk about it because they don't know if somebody's going to believe them, or they're scared to talk about it because, like you said, they say, "Oh, it's happened so many years ago, then I'm just out of luck." That's not necessarily the case. There are certain, unfortunately, situations where that may be the case. Even if the facility has changed hands or is gone out of business, you may still have a case. You need to call an attorney who does this type of work and talk to them. Get your friends together, get what evidence, and even if it's just you, even if you're the only evidence, that may be enough. And that's another thing we see is folks say, well, I don't have a police report, or I don't have any direct evidence. It's just what I remember, what I say. We've won cases on that. A good attorney is going to look for medical records, going to look for police reports and all that other stuff, but you can make a case. That's what we get paid to do, as is we, shoe leather lawyering, right? Is we go digging, we go find those witnesses, and you give us as much as we can, and we go from there. So the most important thing is if this has happened to them, they need to talk to an attorney. If this has happened to their kid, they need to talk to an attorney that does this type of work and see, based on their specific state, what's available. And we filed suits under the consumer protection rights. Some states have consumer protection laws that say, hey, false advertising. And we've won those cases against these facilities because they promise the moon and they deliver nothing, right?
Yeah.
So those are lawsuits. You got medical malpractice, where you have one therapist for 200 kids. They don't talk to them. There's a famous case where they had all the kids drugged up on Haldol. They're just zombies. Just every kid at that facility drugged up all the time. So he lost his license, and it was a very large settlement for that. You've got facilities that have these sadists beating kids or raping kids. Those are big cases, and there's lots of people up and down the chain that you can get to.
And even the child that got crushed to death.
Right.
There was like a lot of things these days. It was videoed. Somebody got the video on it, right? You never know who actually videoed your horrible situation. So and I think that to some degree there might be people in the audience. Maybe it happened to you or your friend or part of your family, and you're very private, and you're like, oh, I don't want to go through this again. Number one, attorney-client privilege means that when you call either me or Caleb or your attorney and you explain this, that's where it goes. Even if you go to court, like, can you explain like what types of privacy protections you get when you go to court? Is it the person's name on the front page of the newspaper, or what do we do?
Yeah, and so and again, that's can vary a little state to state, but generally, certainly anything you tell your attorney, that's confidential. Nobody's going to hear that. That is protected by law. That is concrete. We may be able to make the case without you testifying, but this may be a settlement where we never even get to trial, where we can settle this out. Your name's not going to be plastered across the front page of the paper. We can control to some degree how much media coverage you get, how much, if you want to talk. Some folks, it helps them a lot, and they want to talk and they want to share their story. And like you said, some folks are like, I don't want any of that. I just want to help make sure this doesn't happen to another person. In your specific situation, we can help you do that too. And that's part of the planning, the strategy that you and your attorney will engage with.
Excellent. And you mentioned unsilenced. You also mentioned maps. What are the maps like? So I'm a parent. I'm like, boy, I sent my child. He was saying that they were doing all these horrible things. I want to look into see whether, that place, that facility, had any press release, or is that what the maps are all about?
Yeah. So they've got a map, and they actually have, it's really great, a facility database. So you can go and find a specific facility, and then everything they have will be in there for you. So if you sent your kid to Agape Ranch, for instance, which was a conversion camp, a gay conversion camp in Missouri, then you can look and you say, there's 26 indictments. Here's all these press releases. Here's court documents. Wow. It's all right there, and you can see it. And, I think for some parents, there's guilt, right? You sent your kid there because you're being a good parent. It's not your fault. It's not your fault. These facilities are at fault. These facilities lied to you just like they lied to dozens, hundreds of other parents. That guilt, I think, sometimes keeps them from taking that step to hold these facilities accountable. That is the only thing that you would be at fault for at this point, is if you don't do something. If you let them get away with what they did to you, with what they did to your child, then they're just going to do it to another child. This is your chance to hold them accountable for what they did to you and help make sure they can't do it again.
Not only the holding accountable, but I also want to say this. Some people think, they hate the lawyers. We're so litigious. We're always suing and suing and suing. Look, if you've been victimized by this, you probably, I don't care if it was 20 years ago, you probably need some treatment. You probably need a lot of treatment. God only knows the economic losses that you've suffered over the course of your life because of this incident. I mean, or it could have been multiple incidents at the same facility, and you're entitled to compensation, reasonable compensation. And if you hire an attorney like Caleb, he's going to get you every dime that you need. And so it's not only you getting compensation, but you hold them accountable and you put the word out on the street, not Wall Street, but the street, and you let these facilities know we're on to you. Okay. The game's up and it's just going to snowball. And that's the way it should be. Because these facilities that are making profits, hiring, minimum wage employees to take care of your kid that you couldn't take care of, you think that's a good idea? I don't think so. That doesn't sound
Right.
like you're getting a good result there.
Well, and we see it time and time again is once somebody has the courage to stand up and say, this happened to me, then other people have the courage to stand up. There are people out there that are not as brave as some of your viewers. There are people out there who are gone, who have lost their life through drug usage that is directly related to what they suffered at these facilities. Stand up for them. Stand up for yourself. Point the finger and hold, like you said, shed a light on what they've done so that the next family doesn't get suckered in, so that they can't make a profit. And so that if they do stay in business, they're going to actually do what people are paying them to do, and that's take care of children.
All right. So we mentioned Paris Hilton. We mentioned that Dozier facility up in Florida. Did I hear that there was a documentary on this whole issue?
There's a bunch of documentaries. I can't think of all the names off the top of my head. I know Vice, famous, the videographers, did a great piece on it. We did a show on Ring of Fire with Mike Papantonio, kind of an 8-minute show. It's on YouTube, Ring of Fire, the exploited teen industry. There is a documentary, I believe, on Netflix about it. Unsilenced has some media relations stuff on there, some things you can read. I've written some articles on the matter that are geared towards attorneys. We had one up here in MTMP magazine. I think there's going to be one in FJA, the Florida Justice Administration Association magazine, fairly soon. If the viewers want to contact me, I can send them that article. I'd be happy to talk to them and educate them further. I think this is something that we owe to ourselves and to our communities to hold these people accountable. I mean, if you're a lawyer, in my mind, this is what we got law licenses for. This is what we became lawyers for, is to stand up for the little guy, to hold these big corporate fat cats accountable for what they're doing, to expose them, to make them stand in court and answer for what they've done, and to help. That's what I went to law school for. That's what I got my bar license for. All
right. Did we miss anything?
I don't think so. I think that we've gotten a good overview of what we're talking about. For the survivors out there, God bless you. If you need anything, please don't hesitate to call us here at 11 Papantonio Rafferty. Call your attorney. If you want a copy of that article, I'll be happy to send it. You can contact us. We can get our contact information out there. But I really appreciate you having me on to talk about this issue.
All right. And in the show notes to the show, we will publish your article and maybe some of the information from Unsilenced, some of these maps. Or the main map. So there'll be lots of information for you. Look through the show notes. Anyway, that will do it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Caleb, thank you tremendously for coming on. Fantastic information. I mean, not fantastic information, compelling information, disturbing information. What's new? All right. You keep up the good work. All right, Caleb, we'll be in touch. All right.
I appreciate you. Thank you for having me.
Okay.